Taxi, Uber, Lyft drivers of Reddit, what are the most interesting, entertaining, ducked up situations that happened to you during the shift? Back in the 70s as a student, I drove a taxi in the weekends and some evenings, nights to earn some extra money. One time, late at night, I got a call to pick a guy up at his home. At arrival, the guy hops in the back with a sports bag with few rifles sticking out. I could see that in my rear view mirror. He wanted me to drive out of town to some B road, and in the middle of nowhere he told me to stop the car on a small road in an area with a lot of trees. Hopped out of the car with his bag. Came back few minutes later without the bag and told me to head back to his place and drop him off. He gave me a huge tip, and this is the first time I ever mentioned this happened. I matched with a girl on Tinder by accident, and she messaged me saying she liked PBR, which is in one of my pictures. Being awkward and not wanting to waste her time, I just unmatched without saying anything. Around this time I was near the beginning of my brief tenure as an Uber driver. And who the duck do you think I pick up the very next day? I immediately try to slouch, hoping she doesn't recognize me. And after 5 minutes of silence, right when I think I'm in the clear, she says, "Hey, did we match on Tinder?" To which I reply, "I don't think so." Then she says, "Yeah, I messaged you about PBR and then you unmatched me." And I just let out a feeble kind of "oh, yeah." Then I look down at my GPS, and there's 25 minutes left in this ride. I did not get a tip. Picked up 2 guys from a hotel. Destination is in the Hollywood Hills. When we're navigating up the winding roads of the hills, one of the guys mentions that he hates going to famous football player's house because he always gets a little carsick. He tells me he knows this player because he plays for the famous player's alma mater and is in town to work out for the NFL draft that year. This house is at the top of a hill with a beautiful view. When we get there, the drafted asks me to wait for a couple minutes and he enters the house. After a while, he gets back in the car and tells me I'm gonna follow 3 other cars to Six Flags. First car is a big black Suburban followed by 2 luxury German sedans, and here I am with my economy car with an Uber sticker on it. I used to drive Uber at Fort Myers Beach. I picked up 4 drunk as a skunk middle-aged people and crammed them into my tiny car. I was about to pull into their neighborhood. Nice. Gated. On the water. And the one guy was like, "I need you to follow that car." I'm like, "Whatever. Let's see how this plays out." So we start following this random SUV and I'm like, "Who is this guy?" And they're like, "We don't know. But we have 20 minutes of babysitter left and we aren't wasting it." I reminded them they were on triple rate surcharge and they literally didn't care. Eventually the car pulled over and everyone shouts at me, "Go, go, go." And we sped off into the night. $100 ride. $20 tip. 5-star review. 100% worth it. Entertaining drunk, otherwise responsible people is a blast. I drove a taxi in a suburb of Boston for a while in the 80s. One day, a kid in his 20s with a baseball bat hailed me and asked me to take him to a pharmacy nearby. It was the middle of the day, so I assumed he was coming from softball practice. He told me to wait. Then he went into the pharmacy and left the bat in the car. A minute or 2 later, he came running out of the pharmacy with the pharmacist right behind him. Was this guy nuts? What kind of criminal uses a cab as a getaway car? I casually reached back and locked the door just as he reached the cab. He fumbled with the handle, realizing that he left his only defensive weapon inside, and then ran off. I let the pharmacist into the cab, and then the 2 of us made a slow pursuit of the guy, while reporting his location over the radio. No cell phones. Eventually, he was so exhausted that I got out of the cab and held him until the police arrived. I had to testify in court and identify him. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. I was unemployed at the time. Quit a job due to an abusive, toxic work environment. Had recently graduated a coding boot camp but wasn't having any luck landing new opportunities. Bills were piling up, and honestly I was losing hope. I'm about to call it a night. Driving drunks around gets tiring when I decide what's one more? Turns out these 3 older women wanted to do some gambling in the next state over and had trouble finding a ride. I said yes. Figured I'd just call it a night after. We get talking. Turns out one of them is an IT consultant. They decide to pay me basically $100 an hour to hang out till they are done and drive them all home. We ended up connecting. She revised my resume and put me in touch with some references of hers. I ended up making a good buck off the fares alone. And also ended up completely turning my life around by landing a dream job with a little bit of help. I wrote her a sincere thank you once I accepted the new offer, and she replied with help others because you can. Not a day goes by where I don't think about how lucky I am. Edit. Thanks for the silver. It's really been a wild ride. I'm glad I can share. Not a driver, but was recently a passenger in an Uber. It was a Monday morning, so of course I was a little down and not in the mood to talk too much. The driver starts going on about how beautiful the weather is and starts explaining a good day starts with being positive. She then asked if I would like to see her book. I was a little confused, but I said sure. She starts explaining that she carries this scrapbook with index cards and markers for all of her writers. She said she usually asks them to write some sort of positive message or just tells them they can simply write whatever they want. This book was filled with notes from people where we live, outside of the area, and even from people traveling from outside of the country. Some writing uplifting messages, some writing random funny lines, some drunks scribbling support for our sports teams. Just so many different messages from so many random people on different walks in life. Before I got out, I told her how the messages completely turned my Monday around for the better and I really appreciate what she does. She simply said, if she can bring a smile to someone's face, a day is made. I now always hope that I have the same driver whenever I request an Uber so I get a chance to continue reading the book of positivity. I picked up 4 guys wearing neon green tutus. The guy in the front seat looks at me while I'm driving and says, "Don't do drugs." Then proceeds to snort sugar from some sort of vial. I smiled and said, "Please don't do drugs in my car." I picked up a guy who either refused to pay a hooker from the night before or didn't know she was a lady of the night. She proceeded to follow us. Finally he gets a call from someone. Seemed like it scared him because he told me to bring him back to his place. She followed us back there. I promptly left. Probably should have kicked him out sooner. Had a former NFL player live tweet from my backseat that he wanted to punch me in the mouth because I was chewing gum and he could hear it. Never said a word to me. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Maybe be an adult and let someone know next time instead of threatening them on social media like a little itch. The folks driving you are people, too. My most memorable would be, I picked up a girl coming home from work. We started talking about my education and what I did before Uber and it just turned out that her company was looking for my skills. She gave me her card. I shot her my resume and 2 years later I'm still working for that company and have been promoted to a junior executive LVL. I've never had to drive Uber since. Drove for Uber for a bit. Once picked up this guy who ended up being a magician. It's 2 AM and had to drive him into Manhattan to his apartment. It was weird cause nobody was around. The city was dead quiet for some reason. He sat in the front seat and told me stories the whole ride there. Once there he told me to get out and did a magic trick for me. He made 4 $100 bills turn into $4 bills and gave me it for a tip. Not me, but my mom. She was delivering Uber Eats last winter to some guy a little out of town. The location was a bit odd, but she went with it. Just outside our city on one of the side roads by some train tracks she parked her car and looked around for any houses. None. There was a train stopped nearby and suddenly my mom noticed a guy waddling through the deep snow towards her. "Are you?" Random name. Calling him Bob. "Bob?" He nodded, took the food, and waddled towards the train. Suddenly it starts up and continues down the tracks. This guy deadass ordered Uber Eats while conducting a train. Picked a guy up from a strip club around 5 PM. He had clearly been there for a while and was talkative drunk. He started talking to a friend on his phone and kept saying he couldn't go into detail because he had a lady driver. He told me he was going home and then taking his daughter out to a basketball game because there was an after game concert she was very excited about. Little did he know, or I know because I was just following the GPS, that he had been routed to her high school. Dude's in a rumpled suit, smells like strip club, and is clearly not sober. He got a resolved look, handed me a few singles, said thanks for the ride boo, and just hitched up his pants like a man embracing his itty situation. I've seen a few documentaries about girls taking a taxi but forgetting their wallets. This didn't happen to me. A friend of mine drives for Uber and picked up a girl on her way home from a night out. She was in the backseat and he assumed she was sleeping. Turns out she had overdosed and died whilst he was driving her home. Super depressing. Not a driver but had a mate pull up the handbrake in a moving taxi last week after a big night out. Thought it'd be hilarious to do a runner straight after it came screeching to a stop. Guess who left their iPhone with a special wallet case sitting on the seat? I think the coolest thing not many people realize about Uber Lyft is you have no hours or set times to work. So when I used to work in a college town I would often get invited into places or parties, and if I had made enough money or it seemed slow I would just sign off and see where the night took me. The last Uber rider I ever picked up was a teenage kid, maybe 16ish, and what I would assume was his girlfriend. They got in the backseat and after a few minutes started to hear some unsettling sounds. Look back and she is straight up blowing him in my backseat. It was like 3 in the afternoon and I picked them up from the mall. Who does that? Probably not what you wanted to read, but I've read a book of a taxi driver full of stories like this. One was a couple directing the driver deeper and deeper into the woods, then down a side road close to the autobahn, at which point he initiated his silent alarm. Then the couple found what they were looking for, a small cross with burned out candles around. It was where they had lost their infant daughter in a car crash. On the autobahn next to it, driver averted his alarm while they put up new candles. I have several. The first that comes to mind was the 78-year-old lady that insisted that I needed to know about the hookup she was going home from. She went into descriptive detail about her sexual life. When she realized that I wasn't into that conversation, she decided that talking about Trump was the next best thing. The other was a guy that I picked up at about 5 PM on a Wednesday. This dude was probably the most drunk person I have ever met. He kept calling me smart guy and asking me if I spoke French and German. When I told him no, he insisted that I did and called me a liar. I had to ask him if he wanted to take the tollway and he said it was up to me since I was the smart guy. I ended up taking the tollway and he yelled at me asking why I went that way. I ended up basically giving him 2 options. Get out of the car on the tollway or shut the duck up. When I dropped him off, it took him 10 minutes to get out of the car. His house was right before a cul-de-sac, so when I came back around he was standing in the road so I couldn't pass. Dude was a psycho. Not the driver, my uncle is. But he had Chris Evans sit in the car with him and my uncle never realized until he saw Chris on the big screen. Everybody who is under 30 in the house was surprised and angry he didn't take a picture. A friend of mine was a Postmates delivery driver and had a Wendy's order. He said it was to an apartment building and when he reached the room he kept knocking but there was no answer. He heard ambulance sirens and screeching tires and people yelling. Paramedics came up to the floor and were yelling at him to see if she was still alive. Turns out the girl had ODD. Former Uber driver here. 1 sexually harassed at 3 AM. Threatened to beat his skinny ass. He got out of the car. 2. Bet the passengers 50.00 I could make it to the liquor store before close. I won. 3. Went toe to toe with a drunk at 2 AM for refusing service to his drunk son. He called me a bitch. And I said that's cunt to you. Sir, now get the duck out of my face. Cops took him away. Many more stories. But those are the big 3 that remain in my memory. I'm not the driver, but a drive told me this story once. This guy called an Uber, asked the guy just to drive. He lied in the back seat, eventually asked him to drive him to Santos, a beach near São Paulo. I'm Brazilian. He drove around there for a while. They stopped for some coconut water and the guy eventually paid for the gas because the tank was emptying. Guy was just sad because he broke up with his girlfriend and wanted to get out of his house. The fare was around 1200 reais. Uber passenger here, not driver, but in my little first ever Uber, the driver told me she got in an accident 2 days prior and followed that story with 2 accidents in 2 weeks, why do I still have this job? Then laughed and laughed. Yo, I definitely felt safe. Another driver went 30 over the limit everywhere he went. Dude was going full speed racer and I felt like they were going over that cliff. Guy from the show. Lastly, I had one driver that kept asking me if I've ever done sugar, and when I said no and have no plans on it, he told me I was wasting my life away being the loser at the parties that just sits there doing nothing while everyone goes wild. Okay, buddy. Lol. I have been in 6 Ubers and have 3 stories. Really says a lot. Not a driver, but one time my friend and I, both mid-20s F, went to a bar and immediately were approached by 3 very intoxicated 40-something-year-old men. They asked if we could give them a ride to a nearby hotel, and when we hesitated they said they'd give $20 and that the bartender could vouch they were good people. I guess one guy was his cousin. The hotel was less than a mile away, so we said off it and agreed. At that point they called over a 4th guy, and all came out to pile in my car. Now, my car is a subcompact hatchback and there's 6 people piling in. No way were we getting a 4th full-grown man in the back seat. So being a hatchback, he just put him in the trunk. As we're driving there, they're doing their drunken banter when one of them goes, "Are you guys Uber?" The guy in the trunk responds, "I'm in the ducking trunk and you're asking if they're Uber?" I died laughing. Totally worth it. Happened to a friend of mine. He's not a Uber or a taxi driver, but he was a security guard doing patrol driving. The way his car was stickered up could easily confuse somebody into thinking it was a taxi, especially at night. So this one evening he's driving from one job to another for his patrol. He pulls up at a set of traffic lights next to some nightclub. All of a sudden this drunk guy and his GF get into the back and give him an address to drive to. My mate explains to the guy that he's not a security guard and not a taxi driver. The dude gets confused for a second, then starts laughing thinking my friend is joking around with him and repeats the address where they want to go. My friend decides to make the best of the situation when he realizes the guy's house is only a few streets away from where he has to go for his next patrol job anyway, so he drives off, drops the guy and his GF at their destination, and when the guy asks the price, my friend says $150. No hesitations, the guy hands over the money and leaves. How here a regular taxi would have only cost like $30 or $40. He was so blind drunk he didn't realize my mate was ripping him off. I was once making small talk with my Lyft driver and asked him if he ever had a weird experiences as a driver. He got all excited and starts telling me in great detail how he fingered a girl. It was so extreme that it was a little disturbing. I drove for Uber in Flagstaff, AZ for drunk college kids. I never had anybody puke. I had a girl pee herself though. She said she had to go. Her sister was with her. I asked if she wanted me to pull over. Her sister said no. She got out in the middle of the street and peed, but wet herself too. The ducked up thing was that she was only like 200 feet from her hotel. I charged her the $150 cleaning fee. I bet next time she goes out she pees before she leaves the bar. HA. Obligatory not me but my stepfather. My stepfather has been doing Uber as full-time job for over 2 years now. About a month ago he got a trip to Austin. Note that we live in Houston, so the trip is about 3 hours long. He picks up 2 men who were carrying some suitcases. He starts the trip and it's all calm and good until he arrives to the location where he was supposed to drop the men off. See, he told me that the place was some warehouses, but when he arrived the place was full of cops and these cars parked and arresting some people. One of the men tells him to end the trip and keep going. They stop at a Walmart where the men told my stepdad to give them a ride to the place where he picked them up initially and they would pay him in cash. When they arrive my stepdad drops them off before one of the men tells my stepdad that he saved their lives that day. I had a couple ride one time in which a Hindi, Pakistani, and Israeli man had a very intense conversation about the political climate between their countries. No, they weren't fighting or anything like that. They had a perfectly calm yet very deep intense conversation about their views on each other's race, and the divide that happens between the Hindi and Muslim cultures and Yiddish, Hebrew, and Muslim cultures. I gotta tell you, man, I've seen and experienced this before, but to be that close to people talking about their differences, discovering holy crap they're not that different, and seeing the different viewpoints put such a light on those conflicts. As far as I know, those gentlemen didn't know each other. I dropped them at different locations for different companies, and I doubt I'll ever see any of them again. But that small window of a 20-minute conversation confirmed now more than ever, if you take out the venom and vim of racial ties, then you're just left with people who want problems solved, and people who are just searching for some understanding. So, thank you Abib, Amir, and Yusuf. You guys were some awesome cats. Not a driver, but a passenger. Like every single day, so I've got plenty of stories but only a few stand out. 1. I thought it was slightly scary when a very clearly high off his damn horse picked me up one day, but I'm like whatever's cause he was super close and I was in a hurry. Anyways, he said he needed to also make a pit stop and it was also just around the corner. I didn't really wanna mess with a high person, so I agreed and we went on our merry way. It took like 30 minutes to get there, and all in all it ended up being a full-blown drug deal in a neighborhood that was filled with people who looked like they wanted to shoot and or stab each other at any moment. I was late for work that day, but didn't even complain and stayed quiet the whole time. I was so scared. One guy was eating fried chicken while dealing too, so that was cool. 2. Another that happened to me. Now, I'm white. Like whiter than white, but my skin color gets me mistaken for being Middle Eastern a lot, especially by Middle Eastern Uber drivers, and for some reason, my name as well. This is relevant to my drive. Anyways, this driver was complimenting me from the start, telling me how beautiful my Middle Eastern beauty was and all that jazz. I was being polite and thanking him, but then it got uncomfortable when he started putting his hand on my knee. In no way was I wearing any type of revealing clothes. I usually, not anymore after this incident, sat in the front seat, but my mistake this time. More compliments and hand getting higher and higher. By mid-thigh, I told him I put in the wrong address and to please pull over, and we were here. He stopped and I got out and walked the rest of the way, which took a good hour and a half but was worth it. I complained to Uber. I guess he got a lot of negative reviews and stars and was assified, and I was given my money back. It was really scary. Everyone hold on. This is a crazy ride. It was 1 AM Saturday night, Sunday morning, and I picked up 2 drunk girls from the bar and proceeded to take them home. One sat shotgun, and one in the back. The one sitting in the shotgun seat is belligerently drunk, and the friend in the back seat is almost there, but not quite. On the way back home, they start to complain to each other about not finding a guy to go home with. Now, the lady in the shotgun seat wasn't the ugliest thing you've ever seen, but wasn't the prettiest either. Backseat shorty was a train wreck. The fact that they were both so drunk though turned them both into 3S. Anyway, I make a few jokes here and there, along the lines of, damn, another night at home, or looks like you need to call your handyman, and made them laugh. Little did I know I had just ducked up. Shotgun shorty became very fond of me throughout the car ride. Long car ride, about 25 minutes with frequent stops, and starts to place her hand on my leg and starts rubbing it and inching closer to my manhood. She started to compliment me in the most unflattering way possible, rubbing my legs and saying she's never had an Uber driver this cute before, and after of about 2 minutes of that she starts molesting me, all whilst I'm going 45 miles per hour down the road. I repeatedly would tell her I have a girlfriend. This is inappropriate, and at what point her friend, backseat shorty, is rooting the whole thing on and literally sounds like she's at a baseball game cheering for her child's baseball team. I was pretty close to their destination at this point, so I decided to just power through it until they got home. Because, even though they were very disrespectful and sexually assaulted me, they were 2 drunk girls and I wasn't going to kick them out in the middle of nowhere at 1 AM, and I wanted to at least make sure they got home safe. When we arrived at their destination, Shotgun shorty stumbled out of the seat and over to my side of the car, opens the door and grabs my hands and tries to pull me out the car while saying I rode in your car, Mr. Uber, let me ride you now, and other obscenities. So, after respectfully declining multiple times and getting back in my car, she starts to get verbally agitated about not being able to have sex with me, and starts telling me she can't wait to tell Uber that I tried to take advantage of 2 drunk girls and about how I tried to rape them. Obviously didn't happen, and started throwing their belongings and swinging their purses at my car. So I just dismissed them and left and continued with the rest of my night. The next day, I received a call from Uber and they advised me that I received a poor review on my page and the review was horrendous and poorly spelled, obviously typed out while still intoxicated, saying exactly what they said they were going to tell Uber. After further examination, her rider profile review is a 2-star and has had other occurrences with different Uber drivers with similar situations. After a brief conversation, Uber decided it was a false review and removed it from my page. TLDR. Drunk girl rider sad she didn't get any D for the night. Made a last-ditch effort at a Uber driver, me, to get her rocks off and starts molesting me. And after telling her no, she got extremely angry and accused me of abuse and told Uber I tried to sexually assault her. And after Uber realized this wasn't the first time this has happened with this rider, and that it didn't really happen, they removed her review. Edit to remove the word borderline because this is sexual assault.